Hello, everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about how exactly did I write Love of the Sea anyway? So, first things first, I have to tell y'all how this became such an amazing book. It all started in my humble fiction writing class when I was a student at Columbia College, Chicago. My professor, Tina Jens, who is today my mentor, she assigns a particular writing assignment that we have to do multiple times throughout the semester is called the What If and Then Oh Shit. It's a fun little process where basically you have to pick some sort of fantasy element and then you work through those three main plot points for the story. And for the sake of the class, it's supposed to be like a short story that you can later then expand into a novel if you want to. So, for that, I took the concept of mermaid. Don't ask me why I picked that. To this day, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember why I picked mermaid. I just did. And for the what if, I had a very simple what if. It's what if instead of the mermaid wants to be human to be with a human man, what if she wants the human man to turn into a mer and fall in love with her and come live with her in the ocean? So basically, as I always explain to people, Love of the Sea is literally it takes the original Little Mermaid story and turns it on its head. That's the entire premise of the book, which is also the entire premise of the what if of the assignment. My teacher loved that, by the way. Tina loved that concept. And I mean, it's an awesome concept. Not to toot my own horn here or anything, but those are the big types of concepts that really sell today is take an old concept and make it new again. Turn it on its head. Make it just completely crazy and different. Just make it your own. It's a really great tool that you can use in order to create new stories. So then the next part of the assignment is and then. What does that mean? So basically, it's you need something else to happen in the plot. As I talked about in my previous video with outlining, you have your small huzzah and you have your big huzzah in the story for your little, plot devising. So this would be the small huzzah in that case, the and then. So for Love of the Sea, I had the and then be that Azrae, the main character of Love of the Sea, the mermaid, ends up having to become human in order to get what she wants, which y'all may be sitting here being like, but that's totally the opposite of the premise of what you just said. Exactly. You're not expecting it because it is the total opposite of the premise. And no spoilers, of course, but her reasoning behind it is kind of that idea of you have to give a little in order to take, in order to get what you want. So she has to meet her prince halfway here in order to get him to kind of come with her to the sea. It's a whole thing. You got to read the book. It's fantastic. But that was the and then is basically we're kind of, taking a step reverse from the plot premise. And the oh shit is the part of the story, the big huzzah, and it's supposed to be very surprising. So again, you want to surprise your reader, give them something totally unexpected, which honestly, in most fantasy, sci-fi, fiction, a lot of that kind of stuff, you want it to be totally unexpected. Whereas in a lot of things like romance and mystery, those are formulaic in the opposite way, in that readers really don't like to be surprised. They want to be able to see what's coming. You can have small surprises, but you cannot have big earth-shattering surprises in those genres. That's totally the opposite of what those genres are for. I'm talking about in terms of other genres. You want to have that big huzzah, the big surprise. So, for Love of the Sea, the oh shit moment is a big spoiler that I can't tell y'all because honestly it'll ruin the book. If I tell y'all, you have to read the book in order to get that spoiler. But basically, it is a huge turning point for Azrae. It is a huge point about her past that she was not aware of, that the Sea Hag has been protecting her from, because she knew how devastating it would be for Azrae to know this information. And she doesn't get this information until Azrae is basically at the pinnacle of what she wants in the story. Again, no spoilers, just laying it out there that it's pretty near the end of the book, and that's how it's supposed to be. Is the big huzzah moment is supposed to be near the 3/4 mark of the book. You want it to be pretty much near the end of the book. So that is how I originally wrote this book. Is it was a short story that I expanded into a novel. I originally wrote the novel throughout my years in college under the tutelage of Tina Jens. And then it just kind of sat on my computer for a while because, as people who follow my social media know, I was working as a professional model while I was going through college. And when I graduated in 2011, I basically took that career by the horns and just ran with it. Because in the modeling industry, you have a very small window of time when you can actually do that job. And I wanted to take advantage of it to its fullest. So I put literally everything else in my life on hold and focused on my modeling career. So I wasn't doing my writing or my art during the time period until I retired in 2013. And unfortunately, there were a lot of personal events that just made things difficult for me. And it took me a while to really build myself back up creatively in terms of working on my art and my writing. So it wasn't until 2015 when I was kind of getting back into my groove, taking more steps into being a creative professional again, that I began to attend a local event that Tina Jens runs called Gumbo Fiction Salon, which is basically an open mic event where writers come together and they read excerpts from their stories and hang out and give each other advice, all that good stuff. So I started attending that, and I started to fall in love with my writing all over again, started becoming confident with doing that again. And then in October of that year, Tina let me know that they were funding an event called So You Want to Be an Author. And what this was is they were going to fly in publishers from New York City, and you could schedule appointments with them to pitch your novel to them. This was huge. Absolutely huge, y'all. And Tina basically kind of gave me the kick in the pants I needed to be like, hey, I need you to go dust off that manuscript and I need you to sign up for this event. So I did. And y'all, oh my God, I did not sleep. I spent every waking moment that I had working on my manuscript, Love of the Sea, for that event. And I ended up getting a slot with one of the publishers, and I made it all the way up to the second round. So the in-person interview where I pitched my novel to them, and they really liked it. And then they asked me to send them a partial, which I did. And unfortunately, it just didn't really fit what they were looking for. They were very specific in their rejection, but they said it was a really great story and I should absolutely send it somewhere else. So after I had a good cry, I put on my big girl pants, went online, started researching other publishers, and I ended up finding my current publisher, Inksmith Publishing. I submitted to them. Pretty much it was, I would say, within the same year, 2018. And I went through the whole process, y'all. I got back the first yes, where they say, hey, we really like this, send us a partial. Got the next yes, hey, we really like this, send us the full request, full manuscript sent off. And then, y'all, I got that sweet, sweet book contract. Oh, best day ever, honestly. The first one is always the most exciting. I mean, it's always exciting. It's always exciting, y'all, but the first one is something really, really special. So I went through that whole process, and Love of the Sea ended up being a book in April of 2018. My apologies. I sent it out in 2017. The event and submitting to Inksmith Publishing was in 2017. I get my years a little mixed up sometimes, part of being old. But yeah, so I was able to get a really fast turnaround on that because of my talent as a writer, because of the tutelage of Tina Jens, and because of the awesome feedback and opportunity that I had with this New York publisher. And the fact that my education at Columbia was specifically in fiction writing. I learned how to do all these things at that school. Specifically, I learned how to submit to publishers, how to research publishers, how to network, do all those professional things as a professional author, which really is one of the big puzzle pieces that I know a lot of people in the writing community are missing is they write the manuscript and they're holding it and they're kind of like, now what do I do with this? Whereas I'm very lucky that I've had the education on the next steps where I have my manuscript now to what do I do with this? I have all those steps. So that really helped cut a lot of the time for me. I also admit that I am incredibly lucky the fact that on the second try, I got published. Part of that was also strategy on my part in that I didn't submit to a big, huge publishing house like Random House or Penguin Publishing or anything like that. I submitted to a smaller publisher that I knew would be more likely to take my manuscript because there's less competition and they also have different standards than a huge big whoop-de-doo publishing house. You don't have to be a New York Times bestseller in order to get accepted there. There are different levels, and we'll talk about that in another one of my videos, but the whole idea of, there are different levels of the publishing industry and what you really need to research and shoot for in order to be successful as a new author. So, once I had all of that, it was a long process of getting the book published, y'all. It's always a long process. So to back up a little bit, y'all. Some of y'all may be asking, well, you kind of glossed over the part where you actually wrote the thing. Yes, so that was the whole process on how I went from manuscript to book with this particular story. How exactly did I write the story of Love of the Sea? Basically, after it being an assignment in Tina Jen's class, as I explained at the beginning of this video, I took that and I expanded it into a full manuscript. And I did that utilizing the outlining technique that I mentioned in my previous video and just kind of took all those different ideas that I had and started plugging them into different sections of my book. And as I did that, more and more scenes started to grow into the story. That's just, it just kept expanding as I was writing it. And a big part of that also is specifically with the fantasy genre. There's a lot of world building that happens alongside your character development and the conflict of the plot. So you have all these different factors weaving into each other, and that enables you to have a lot of things coming together. It just gives you a lot of ideas to play with in order to explain the world around these characters, the characters themselves, what they're going through, all that good stuff. It just gives you a ton of fodder to work with. Love of the Sea is a fantasy world. It's basically this idea of a coastal kingdom, mildly tropical climate, like, they don't have snow. They have warm weather most of the year, all that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily like, hot tropics, African jungle sort of tropical. It's more like, I would say, Florida tropical, just to give you a gist of the world building that I was building there. Now, because I grew up being a giant Orchosaurus, I read so many textbooks growing up about animals and plants and bugs, and I mean, all the way down to, microbiology, cellular stuff, y'all. And not as in, cell phone, as in like, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, that kind of cellular, basically. I was a giant dork and I just absorbed all that kind of information. And I use that in my world building, especially in fantasy. So I built this whole ecosystem for this world that I created for my characters, which is why the scene with Peter and Cormac competing in the boar hunting scene, that's how that scene came about, was me sitting there and being like, okay, let me think about the environment of this kingdom. What kind of animals are they going to have there? Why are those animals going to be there? Why do I care about these animals in this plot? How can I use them in order to help forward the plot? And boars, Boars, the pig boar thing, was the answer for me. Because in many cultures with monarchies, one of their big things they do is they go out hunting. And because they have the privilege of being the monarchy, they often prefer to go after big game, whether it's boars or bears or deer or lions or tigers. Oh my, all that stuff. They like to go after big animals. So the boar made perfect sense. They're big, they're dangerous, showing off their manliness, all that. And most importantly, it provides food. Because back then, hunting wasn't just about the trophy, the sport, it was also about providing food for the castle, for the people that were there, holding banquets and all that stuff. So that's how that scene was created, was taking all that stuff that I knew historically about monarchies and then all of the biological stuff that I knew about ecosystems and animals and stuff like that. And I was able to create that scene with all that information. That's another big important part of writing as a writer. Use what you know. Use the information that you specialize in and have that really shine in your stories. I'm a giant biology nerd. I put that in my stories. You're going to see a lot of stuff about the environment, about animals, about plants, about bugs. All that kind of stuff is going to play a big role in my writing because it's the information I'm excelling in. It's what I have to share with y'all. By comparison, it's why you're not going to see a whole lot of stuff about science, technology, computers, all that kind of stuff in my stories because I'm not a big sci-fi buff. I don't really understand a whole lot about the nitty-gritty of technology, of computers, of all the physics-y kind of science. I'm not familiar with that kind of stuff. I'm familiar with physical sciences. So play to your strengths with your writing, with your world building, all that stuff. Write what you know. And if you don't know, do research because then you will know. The next part of it was also building the whole religion standpoint because it is a fantasy novel and it is deeply rooted in magic. You have to have some sort of system in that magic to exist in, whether you want it to be some sort of religion, whether you want it to have some sort of scientific explanation, whatever have you. There still needs to be rules when it comes to how magic works. With Love of the Sea, they do have a religion. It is a pagan religion based mostly around the deity Poseidon. They acknowledge that there are other deities and there are other powers, but they kind of focus mainly on Poseidon just for the sake of simplicity in the story, and that it's not important for me to tell y'all about every single deity that exists in the world of Love of the Sea because we don't really have a reason to talk about them. We're talking about our main dude and the main bad guy, Cataramenos. It's sort of a dual creation story sort of thing going on there. And within that, I'm able to create the rules of how all the magic works. What are the limitations of it? Where does it come from? How is it regulated? Why are these creatures magical and these creatures non-magical? All that good stuff. All of that comes from that religion structure in the story. And again, a big part of that comes from me being a giant historical buff dork, and I've read a lot about different religions around the world, both modern and ancient. And I'm able to pull from different aspects of these different histories and cultures and religions in order to kind of mash them together and create one that is suitable for the world that I have created. So you need structure within your stories. You need to explain the why and the how behind stuff that's happening in your story. Stuff can't really just be there just because in your story. You have to have a reason behind it. And that's a big part of the writing that went into Love of the Sea is me asking myself, why is this in the story? Why is this happening in the story? How is this happening in the story? How did these things come to be? All of those questions are very important to ask yourself during your writing process. I learned so much even further about asking myself those questions once I had signed on to be published by Inksmith Publishing and they assigned me an editor. She really picked apart my book, y'all. She went through it with a fine-tooth comb and she pointed out all of my darlings in there where it was there just because. I didn't have a reason, or something was super propped up cardboard where I was just kind of like, yeah, and then this, whatever, blah. And she caught me on all of that. She was like, come on now. Either you need to explain this or it needs to go bye-bye. Pick one. And there was a lot of like, I don't wanna do it. You know, there was plenty of that, y'all, plenty of that. Nobody likes to be called out on their shit. Trust me, nobody likes that. But it's a big part of the process, whether you do it yourself, you hire an editor, or when you get published, you get assigned an editor, all of that kind of stuff. You're going to get called out on that stuff. You're going to have to call yourself out on it, have other people call you out on it. That's part of making your manuscript into a polished book. So make sure that you're asking yourself that along the way with your writing, because trust me, y'all, I asked a lot of questions along the way with writing Love of the Sea and my other novels. The last big part of how I wrote this book is this post-it note editing process that I did while I was working with the editor in Inksmith Publishing. Because she asked me to explain a lot of the how and the why in some of the stuff that I put in the story, it made me take a step back and really reorganize some of the scenes that I had put in the book. So what I did is I actually took an entire stack of post-it notes and I went through my manuscript and I wrote down every single scene that happens in the book. So every time something different happens, they go to a different room, they're in a different environment, it's the next day, whatever, all that good stuff. Wrote them all down on individual post-it notes. And then I arranged them on my wall. And I sat there and I stared at it. And I actually took some of them and started rearranging them. I started making notes on this scene doesn't make sense. Why does this happen? And then this happens, all that good stuff. A big part of editing is seeing the forest through the trees. So sometimes you got to take yourself out of the manuscript where you're looking at it this close and you need to pull back and look at the whole plot for what it is. The A plus B equals C of all these scenes that you've created in your book. And that post-it exercise was a really good way for me to do that. So you don't necessarily have to write a million post-it notes and put it on your wall like I did, but some sort of organizational process like that where you can really big picture it without getting lost in all of the details and the words of your manuscript. Trust me, y'all, it really, really helps. And that was a huge piece of the puzzle in order to make this book a total success for myself. Last but not least, how I wrote this book. I wanted to write this book. This was a fun idea that I had in a college class. I really enjoyed this idea. I loved Azrae as a character. I wanted to know more about her and her world and what she wanted and why. That is first and foremost one of the most important reasons why you should want to write a book is because you want to. I can't tell y'all how many people think that you need to have a good idea in order to write a book. Good ideas are a dime a dozen, but most of them never get done. And the reason is because they're lacking passion. This book became a book because I had passion. I was excited about the story. I wanted to write it. It was exciting for me to write it. And you should feel that way about your own writing too. Now, of course, there are plenty of parts that were a slog, that were not fun, that were not exciting. That's also part of being a writer, unfortunately. Not every scene is fun to write. It's just how it is. And for me personally, anyway, editing is also not fun. It's not a fun process. But you should be excited about your story and your characters. That should be your motivation for creating your story. Or if you have like an important message that you want to share, that's important. Whatever is important to you, that's what you should write about. Too many people think that writing is this like weird magic little formula where if I do this, that, and the other, blah, 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 it'll be a New York Times bestseller. I'm sure there are formulas like that, but the chances of you actually doing it, finishing it, and then making it actually be a New York Best Time seller, pretty teeny tiny. And a big part of that is because you're probably not interested in what you're writing. It's probably going to feel stilted and formulaic, and that's not what writing is about. So, with that, y'all, I hope this was helpful. I hope that inspired y'all to write your own version of whatever your love of the sea is, your story that you're passionate about. And I hope that this gave y'all some insight into my process and how I go about turning my manuscripts into books. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye.